The anti-apartheid activist Desmond Tutu said, "Forgiveness is the highest form of self-interest." And I couldn't agree more, since it is so obvious that holding on and not forgiving someone is, as they say, like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Hi, I'm Debra Poneman, founder of Yes to Success, where we share knowledge and tools for you to live a life of true and lasting inner and outer success, ageless, anti-aging for your brain, your body, and your future, and the Awake Method, because it's time for all of us to wake up. People do some pretty horrible things to one another, and forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the behavior or letting a person back into your life. And forgiveness is not about letting that person win. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself that allows the toxic resentment and anger that you're holding in your heart to stop poisoning you so that you could get on with your life. 18th century British poet and satirist Alexander Pope famously said, "To err is human, to forgive is divine." What he's saying is that when we forgive, we become part of the divine. Pope also said famously, well, maybe less famously, when we forgive, what was an anchor becomes a sail. The word forgive in Hebrew is salah, which means it's the same root as shalom or salam in Arabic, which means peace. Forgiveness brings you peace. And I want to share with you a true story of forgiveness. It was shared by a woman named Mary, and it is in her own words. And I believe it puts most of our stories of how we just can't forgive someone in a new perspective. So here we go. In Mary's words. For years, my life was not what you'd call easy, forced to stand up for myself on many occasions, including going through a tough divorce. I'd learned to be quite a scrapper. The truth is, I found myself upset at people and situations a lot. Unfortunately, this created a great deal of resentment and desire for revenge within me. Then one night in 1996, something happened that made all my previous upsets put together seem trivial in comparison. I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing at 3 a.m. Filled with dread, I picked it up. It was my oldest son, Jay, telling me that my youngest son, 18-year-old Robbie, had been shot. "Mom," Jay said, "Robbie is dead." In that moment, I thought my life was over. The pain of losing Robbie was overwhelming. I wanted to crawl in a hole and never come out, but I knew I had to hold myself together for my other children and to deal with the police, so I put my emotions on hold. Sean, the young man who had killed my son, was arrested and charged with murder. Sean had known Robbie and he shot him while the two had just been in a simple argument. He pleaded guilty, so there would be no trial, just a hearing at which the plea bargain would be arranged and his sentence handed down. I'd have to wait 3 months for that hearing to arrive. I wasn't allowed to see or speak to Sean throughout that time, which is probably wise with my despair and fury at a boiling point. If I could have gotten my hands around his neck, I would have strangled him. That was my baby he had killed. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and I got my first glimpse of Sean. As they led him into the dimly lit courtroom, he kept his eyes on the floor. Shadows masked his face, distorting his features and giving him a dark, sullen appearance. I felt a wave of white-hot anger shoot through me. Why had he done it? Shaking with emotion, I decided not to take the stand, but I told the judge that I wanted to speak to Sean after the hearing was over. Since Sean had pleaded guilty, the verdict was no surprise, and neither was the sentence: 20 to 40 years in the state penitentiary. As the judge had promised, he summoned me to his chambers to meet with Sean. I followed the bailiff down the hall, my heart beating faster and faster with each step as I prepared to meet the young man who had taken my son's life. I'd waited a long time for the opportunity to let Sean know how I felt about what he had done. Now, filled with rage and hatred, I had no idea what I was going to say, but I knew I wanted to let him know what he had done to my life. I was frisked and led into a small paneled office. Sean stood trembling in the corner with his hands and his feet shackled, wearing an oversized orange prison jumpsuit. His head was down, and although he was 20 years old, he was sobbing like a baby, just crying his heart out. As I watched this boy so forlorn, no parents, no friends, no support, all I saw was another mother's son. I asked the bailiff if I could approach Sean. At this, Sean looked up, revealing a childlike face stained with tears. Suddenly, I found myself asking, "Can I give you a hug?" He nodded his consent. The bailiff motioned me towards the prisoner, and I walked over to Sean and put my arms around him. He just melted, sobbing, into my shoulder. It was probably the first compassion he'd had from anybody for a long, long time, if ever. As I stood there holding him, I felt my anger and hatred melt away. Still, what came out of my mouth next surprised everyone, including me. "Sean," I said, "I forgive you for what you've done." Our eyes connected for a few moments, and then I said, "I would rather my Robbie be where he is than be going to prison. I will pray for you every day." I asked Sean to keep in touch, and then the bailiff escorted me from the room. After that, Sean left for prison to begin serving his time. I felt little satisfaction at this. Robbie was gone, and no sentence would bring him back. Yet here was another boy whose life was destroyed. Both of his parents said they wanted nothing to do with him ever again. So Sean and I began corresponding, and for the first 5 years of his sentence, I visited him regularly. In fact, I was his only visitor. Then Sean was transferred to another prison where the warden there does not allow the victims' families to visit, but we still write often. Some people don't understand how I could do it, but I've learned that forgiving doesn't mean condoning. I believe the compassion I felt in the judge's chamber that day was a gift from God. I know I could not have healed the deep, dark places of hatred and revenge embedded within my heart and soul had I not forgiven my son's murderer. Forgiveness set me free. It gave me the peace that I needed to get on with my life and eventually to come to terms with Robbie's death. Since then, I've become what's called a Stephan minister, a type of lay minister through my church. I help people through crises or loss in their lives simply by listening and being there. It requires very little except commitment and compassion, two qualities I have found in great abundance in my heart since the day I forgave my son's killer. I've learned that you only hurt yourself when you hold on to anger and resentment. Now, despite what happened, I feel truly peaceful and happy. Hatred and revenge won't bring back my beloved Robbie, but Sean is someone's son too. The hatred has to stop somewhere. What better place to begin than with me? So that's Mary's story. And now I invite you to ask yourself, is there something that someone did to you that you can't forgive? If Mary could forgive her son's killer, then maybe you can forgive the person who you feel has wronged you. Maybe you could see him or her as God does, as an innocent child, because we're all God's children. You might even want to close your eyes and speak to their soul and tell them that you now understand that they were doing the best they could given all the hurt and the pain that they had endured in their own lives. Maybe they were bullied or unloved or invisible or unwanted. You can even say to them in your heart, "I feel what you did was not okay, but I know you are so much more than that. and I forgive you as God forgives you. The person's hurtful action cannot be changed. It's in the past, and there's absolutely nothing that can be done to change it now. But ask yourself, is what they did worth closing yourself off from all the amazing grace that's waiting to shower down on you on the other side of forgiveness? This person may never change. They are who they are. So take a few deep breaths as you accept the truth of that. But you also should probably accept that that person did whatever they did because they are also in pain. They are also wounded. They may not even realize it themselves, but it's there. People only hurt others because they're hurt themselves. Hurt people hurt people. So see them through the eyes of compassion for their own suffering. Imagine they are a child that is hurting and lashing out at others in their own intense pain. We can't afford to withhold forgiveness. Nothing will destroy our own lives more surely. Or as Martin Luther King famously said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Hate will surely destroy the hater. Again, it's okay if you still feel angry, and it's up to you if you're not ready to let go. But the purpose of this message is to suggest that you might want to begin to release the pain in your heart, not to excuse anyone for their actions. And as the anger begins to dissipate, if you want to now contact that person in this third dimensional reality, that's fine, but it's not necessary. It's already complete on the level of your souls. So it's up to you if you do want to contact that person, but if you do, do it without any expectation. Expectation diminishes the grace. And don't contact them to get something. If you do it only for giving. Do it only to give. And if you do take that step, whatever transpires in third dimensional reality, and we can't predict what it'll be, it's perfect even if it's not what you wanted. But what we can predict is if you can forgive, if you can embrace forgiveness with no expectation, the result will be an even greater space for grace and miracles to pour into your life. So that's it for this week. I send you love and all the blessings your beautiful heart can hold. Bye for now.